Everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be going through another one of the GAMSAT practice question sets and doing another walkthrough. I'm really looking forward to this because it's been like a really long time since I've done one. The last time I did one I think was a couple of weeks out, a week or two out from the March sitting. I've taken a bit of a break from some of the really kind of heavy GAMSAT content and teaching and that kind of thing just because I was kind of exhausted from it. I'm sure everyone else has, had a bit of fatigue from it as well. But we've got the September sitting coming up again, and so obviously preparation. Some people are starting their preparation now, which is probably a good move. And so I figured we'll keep the ball rolling and get more questions in. I'm pretty pumped to do it because I really like doing these kind of videos. It's basically like, this is kind of what I do for work every single day with my high school students or with GAMSAT students and things. So to be able to just do this in a video format is quite cool. And at the same time, we're banking up a whole lot of different free practice questions. So if you haven't already obviously seen the questions, then they're available on my free resources page. And it should be set number 12 for this one. We're well over 100 questions now, which is pretty cool. And I would hope to get that over 200 before the September one. But anyway, so with these questions, as I always say, a disclaimer, I'm not ASA. I don't know what goes on in their actual question writing process or anything like that. I just write these questions to try and, I think, reflect the kind of skills and the style of questions that you might be faced with. I'm being very, very sure to make sure that I'm not in any way replicating any questions that I've seen that would be infringement of copyright or infringement of some of ACE's policies, which is fair. I can't share any of the specific questions that I saw or anything like that. Again, it's probably not really good for you to be going through past questions and focusing too heavily on those anyway. More questions is always good, but ultimately the exam is about you being able to adapt to new information. So being able to replicate questions that have already been done before is not necessarily the skill you're looking for. You're looking for the ability to be presented with brand new information that you've never seen, obviously in a science context, and then be able to adapt to it and understand either, what the patterns are or what kind of rulings they're trying to use, what points of logic are being relied on. And sometimes that's a bit of reading comprehension at the same time. But in saying that, I do think that I'm pretty proud of these questions. I'm normally pretty critical of my own work, but these ones in particular, I think I'm quite happy with. I feel that they are a good reflection of the style of thinking that you would need to perform well in the GAMSAT. So we'll see how we go. I'm also going to try and make sure that I leave a little bit of a gap on the screen in the bottom right corner. This is more of a note to myself more than anything, so that my little window, when I finally then jump down here, I've got a little bit of space around me because I seem to always forget to do this. I end up having to move myself around, so I'm moving over here or moving up there and that kind of thing. And it's just a pain with editing. So I'm gonna actually make a mental note to myself right there so that I don't forget. All right, so we'll go through, I try to go through the reading of it first and break down how I would actually tackle it. Obviously, I've already written the question, so I know where it's all going, but I'll try to kind of give my insights into how I would kind of break it down, how I would process it, and maybe what kind of notes I would take as well, and then we'll go through the questions. So you can obviously pause as you go through at any point and try to answer the question yourself, and the word solution will come up right after it. So with Unit 1, we've got Hamilton-Russell traction shown in Figure 1 below is a form of two-directional lower limb traction arrangements used to treat proximal fractures and dislocations of the femur, hip, and acetabulum. It can also be used for post-operative management of a patient following hip surgery. So anybody who's interested in orthopedic surgery, this is right up your alley. The arrangement involves attaching a rope to the base of the foot near the heel and to a supportive sling at the knee, with the knee slightly elevated and at a slight bend. What I'd be doing here is trying to match the description to the picture, and I can see there that everything's kind of already done in the diagram, so there's no need for me to necessarily be redrawing this at any point to label it. Remember that obviously everything is on the screen, so when you do need to label, you basically need to redraw, which is a bit of a pain. The lower leg should be held parallel to the floor. So we can see this would be the lower leg, and obviously the floor underneath the bed is like this. So these two would be parallel to each other, and which often requires the patient's lower extremities to be on an inclined plane. And we can see that as well. So outside of the fact that we've got the assumption that the leg and the floor are parallel, everything else is actually given in the diagram. The rope is guided through 3 pulleys and then attached, and an attached weight hangs in order to apply force to the system. So we can see we've got pulleys F1, F2, and F3, and then we've also got a pulley here, I guess I should have actually said 4, which is attached through to the base of the foot as well. And then we've got this supportive sling around the knee, holding everything up in place. And then obviously after you've done the question, if you were interested in reading more about it, I always put the links on where I actually get the diagrams from or any particular information. I've just kind of written the stem based on what the diagram is. I'm not an orthopedic surgeon or any kind of expert in this field, so correct me if I'm wrong anywhere. But I figured that it's also useful to have the initial resource if you're interested in just learning a bit more about that topic. So in this case, there's really not all that much for me to kind of process. I would just kind of get straight to the questions. There's no numbers, even though it is a physics question, it's going to clearly be all kind of theoretical and based on general principles of force equilibriums rather than a technical calculation. So question 1, which length of the rope has the greatest tension? So we've got these descriptions here which are a little bit tedious, but this is the kind of thing that you will see. Rather than actually labeling sections A, B, and so on, that would be almost too simple to read. Sometimes it's not really about the physics or the science, it's more just about being able to navigate the wording of the questions or the answers. So here, between the knee sling and F1, so that is this region. So I'm going to label them, that's option A. And I might even, if I was on the notes in my scrap paper, I could potentially redraw this really simply, just draw the rope in roughly the orientation that it's in, and then from there just label A like this and not actually put in any of the other details. So I'll leave that out though, just so I'm not moving the screen around. So between pulley S and F2, so that is going to be over here, between the weight and F3, which is going to be over here, and then D says none of the above. So in this, whenever you've got a pulley system, the idea is that along the one string, assuming there is just one string through the pulley system, the tension in the string or the rope will be the same throughout the entire system. So this is a general principle of pulleys, but you can kind of understand it as well because it's all in equilibrium. So you can't really have one section pulling with greater tension than the other, or else then it would be out of equilibrium and things would be moving in that way. So it's all attached to the same thing. So any weight pulling down here and any weight pulling down this end is going to be transmitted throughout the entire rope. So it's actually a bit of a trick question. It is just D. It's none of the above. We can't say one of them has the greatest tension. They all have equal tension throughout the rope. So then question 2, if a second sling were attached around the ankle and a second rope attached and fixed to F1 with a tension force T where T is greater than 0, which of the following would be true? So we have to kind of navigate the wording here. So I would first try to add to my diagram. So assuming that I've already kind of scribbled something similar to this up on the scrap paper, then we've got another sling is going to be attached around the ankle and then attached through a second rope straight to F1. But it just says fixed to F1. It's not looping around it or anything. It's just attaching to that point. And so now what's going to happen in response to this? It says that there's some tension in this and the tension is greater than 0, just meaning that it's not there just like taking up the slack or the rope has got slack in it. It's pulled tight and there is some force from the weight of the leg now pulling down. What that actually means is it'll take some of the weight off of the first pulley system. The leg obviously isn't going to get any heavier. So that weight force that's pulling down and the counterbalancing weight over here, some of that weight force is going to be taken up by this second rope, and so therefore the tension in this second, or in the initial system, is now going to be lower. So because some of the weight of the leg now is actually removed by this second rope, at the knee you're going to have less weight pulling down, but remember that you've still got the same counterweight over here pulling back up through the system. So if you've got less weight pulling down, the knee is going to actually be raised up, so that will actually then bend like this, the leg, and you'll see that the angle will actually get lower in this case, right? It'll actually crease the knee further because although we've got more weight pulling the ankle up as we predicted there, right? The difference is that's not actually going to straighten the leg because you've got another set of fixed pulleys over here keeping the foot roughly strapped to the bed almost. And so instead what you're going to get is just a raising of the knee and a decrease in this angle. So if we exaggerate it, it'll go like that from originally going like that, right? And so you can see that angle has decreased inwards. So that makes D incorrect. So the most likely is that their leg will raise, and that would be C. Now you can see my first prediction, right? I try to do these as kind of first run as possible. My first prediction was that it would go up like this and their toes would be up in the air, but that was ignoring the effects of F2 and F3. So it would raise, but it would more likely raise like this and actually raise the knee more than anything and decrease that angle. That is, overall the leg is raising slightly, and that is the most correct. Cool. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I've got scribbles all over the place, so if you're confused, I might just quickly do another diagram in there with all of the summaries. So what will actually happen is you'll end up with this happening, or I might even exaggerate that further. You'll end up with this, where the leg would be positioned in this triangular shape here as a result of taking some of the weight off of the knee and over to the ankle in that way. All right, so then question 3, counter traction occurs when the opposing forces at the site of injury or fracture are reduced. Which of the following would produce counter traction in a patient in Hamilton-Russell traction? So we're trying to, you can see here, traction is being caused by these two forces that are counteracting each other there. If they have greater amount, then you've got greater separation, almost greater pulling and, on either end. We're looking for counter traction, so we're looking to decrease that force overall experienced. And so we've got less pulling force through the knee or through the upper leg there. So the first one, raising the foot of the bed. So if we were to raise the foot of the bed like this, then what would happen is the patient's leg would be sitting higher like that, right? Now, what that would actually do is that would actually lighten the load. This is actually basically the exact same as the previous question that we had. If the leg gets raised, then we're decreasing that angle here because the upper leg has to actually twist and go more vertical in a sense. And then what that's going to allow to happen here is the bag will drop. This weight here will go down because you'll be taking up some of the slack as this side shortens. Straightening the legs of the patient, that would not work. That would go the other way. That would increase traction there. So if we remove some of these diagrams, imagine we were just to pull down on their knee like this and therefore have their leg perfectly straight like that. What we would be doing is then increasing the strain or increasing the tension, pulling down overall, right? So that would actually increase traction. So effectively what we're trying to do is put some slack into the cord. The third one, so then C says increasing the suspended weight. That would be completely counteractive because, or counterintuitive, because if you increase the weight, you increase the tension, and that will just pull harder and increase traction. And then adding a fourth pulley is possible, but it doesn't say where this would be attached, and so therefore we can't make any conclusive statements about it. So therefore raising the foot of the bed has the most evidence going for it. Question 4, which of the following would create the greatest torque through the knee of the patient? So again, we're not doing actual calculations here. So we'll go through and go by process of elimination. So lowering the position of F1. So if we lower the position of F1, lowering this here is not going to do anything to the knee. It's just going to raise the knee overall. It's not actually going to even raise the knee. It's not going to do anything to where the knee's position is. So there'll be no effect of that one. Raising the position of F2 and F3, so that's these two over here. If we put them up higher, then try to trace where the ropes would go. It would go like this, yeah, and then, F3 is not there, and then the bag would, I guess, be hanging over the edge of the bed, almost like that. So again, what would this do? So this would create some upward force because of these two sections here. And so that may apply some torque to it. We are looking for the greatest amount of torque. So this is possible. So I'll put that in the maybe pile at the moment. With C, lowering the position of F3 only. Now what would happen in this case, I'll get rid of all of these, is F3 would go down, everything else stays the same. So what is that actually going to do? So that is going to pull downwards even more on the ankle, like that. And then as a result of that then everything else will stay pretty much fixed like this. So then in this case, what that means is you've got an upward component over here, a downward component over here. So that is trying to both pull the lower leg in and then raise the top of the lower leg that way. So you're actually getting this twisting action. It's trying to, I guess, like hinge the knee a little bit more, and that is a whole lot of torque being applied through it. So because you've got both the upward and the downward component working with each other, that would increase the torque and give you the greatest torque. And then finally D, increasing the length of the rope. So if you increase the length of the rope, it's not going to change anything. The torque is still the same. You need to move the positions of the pulleys. So that one is definitely out. And then finally, number 5, which of the following is not an example of Hamilton-Russell traction? So we basically have to go diagrammatically here, right? So we got some information about when it's used and the fact that we've got like the leg parallel to the ground and some other features. The most important here is just going to be the actual position of the pulleys and the position of the leg and the weights. So if we look at the first one, it's more of like a 3-dimensional diagram rather than a force diagram. And we can see we've still got, there's the sling, there's F1, there's F2, there's F3, and there's S on the base of the foot, which is attached by more ropes this way, but it's overall, and there's the weight, it is overall doing the exact same thing. We've also got the slight bend in the knee as well. So that one is Hamilton-Russell, so that one's out. With B, it's the same thing. We're just taking a more zoomed out view, basically. Their leg is still just slightly bent. The sling is kind of above the knee in this case, but that is a very minor change. Otherwise, we've still got this kind of zigzag pattern and then the weight pulling down. So that one looks pretty good. So that one's out. With C, it again looks very similar. We've got the knee sling. We've got a pulley, but it's not attached over to these over here. So we have a mass pulling down here. And then we just have another one that looks like there'd probably be pins or something. Another rope attached to the knee pulling this way over a pulley and then pulling down. So there's a few changes in that one. And then finally with D, it looks very similar to C, which is a bit confusing. The difference is going to be that in D, you've actually got that zigzag pattern. They've just changed the angle at which they're positioned. It's a bit steeper like this, the weight pulling down, and then you've got this counterbalancing weight, which is a little bit different to the ones we saw before. And you've still got the sling over here attached like that. So this one, the only difference is you've got this extra mass, which seems to be supporting the foot and raising the foot up. And I would say the most likely reason for that is there's no pillow underneath. All the others have something supporting the leg. This one doesn't. So this, I would say, is still a Hamilton-Russell. And so in that case then, the one that has the least similarity in the pulley system is actually C for that reason. Cool. All right, so the next question, I'm pretty proud of this question, to be honest. I feel that it's pretty good, but we'll see how we go. It's mostly just a kind of patterns logic question. There's no specific science discipline being applied. It's mostly just looking at data, applying a bit of mathematical reasoning, working your way through. So we've got the locomotor patterns of quadrupeds can be modeled mathematically. Most important to understanding the gait of different four-legged animals are the phase shift patterns of primary gaits. Below is a table summarizing the mathematical model of the output of motor complexes in the nervous system of most quadrupeds for 6 different primary gait types. Each of the 4 legs are numbered 1 through to 4 in the order from front left leg, front right leg, hind left leg, and hind right leg. Now I don't see those labels in the actual table here, so I'm going to go ahead and label that. So this is front left, this is front right, then this is hind left or rear left, and then hind right. Now I can see, just by looking at that, I would start to try and understand this immediately before I've even read the whole thing. That means that the animal is facing downwards on the page if their front legs are at the bottom. And you can see it's the same arrangement in the bottom row. So then an arbitrary non-zero output value for the motor complex is given by U1. We can see that in every single formula here. To signal that a neural output is detected and the time at which the first leg leaves the ground in each cycle T is measured in seconds. So we've got a couple of variables in there. It's assumed that the order in which the motor complexes controlling each leg are activated is the same order in which the foot of each leg both leaves and strikes the ground. And all gaits have a half-second interval over which the foot is not in contact with the ground when lifted. Okay, cool. So we've got a few rules hidden in there, but basically that's actually a simplifying rule, just saying if it goes in the sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, that means the legs leave the ground in the order 1, 2, 3, 4, and they hit the ground again in the order 1, 2, 3, 4. and they're all in the air for half a second individually. So I wouldn't really bother trying to understand every single one of these. I would just try to learn how to read this table. So I'm going to look at walk, and I can see there's an ordering of the legs, and I've got these little functions that tell me when something comes into play. So I can see here this one is, we get a non-zero times t, and then all of a sudden that means that this one, the function of this leg, comes into play at time t, which remember is the time at which the first leg is activated and leaves the ground. So that makes a lot of sense. In terms of the order, you can see this one's delayed by a quarter of a second. So that would mean that leg 3 leaves the ground next, then leg 2, and then leg 4. And I go, okay, perfect. It's just giving me the sequence over which their legs kind of go up and down, up and down. Cool. I'll get rid of some of that scribbling. So it's the same concept for all of the others. I'll point out as well, this was just from the research, the study that I actually got this table from. They actually made a typo. That should say trot there rather than rot. And then it says gait patterns. So I've written in then gait patterns that involve 2 of the feet being in contact with the ground at any one time are called dual strike patterns. So I would define that. And in my notes, I would just write dual strike and then just write equals 2 on ground. And while patterns that involve only one leg being raised, so you can see I'm kind of changing, I'm not always talking about the feet that are on the ground just to make it harder to follow, that involve only one leg being raised at any one time are called tripodal patterns, because obviously they'd be on 3 feet at a time. So I might even just put this as tripodal equals 1 raised, 3 ground. Or something similar to that. You can see my handwriting's shocking. Get that E in there. There we go. Cool. And then, there's a little bit more that I put in. I forgot. Patterns beginning with one or both of the 4 legs are called leading patterns, while those beginning with one or both of the hind legs are called trailing patterns. These are not real terms. I've just made this up because just giving you a lot of different definitions that you have to kind of juggle. Again, you could write those down. I'd be pretty confident knowing, okay, they're pretty logical. Leading, front legs lead, trailing, back legs lead. Cool. So we go into question 1. How many of the 6 primary gaits are tripodal and how many are dual strike patterns? So I would immediately bounce to my definitions on the paper. I'm going to start with dual strike. I'm going to start with tripodal. So 1 raised, 3 on the ground. So if I look at walk, I'm just going to go through each of them and count them up and work out which type they are. So first, the front left leg will raise, and then a quarter of a second later, the third leg raises, the back left. Remember that the front leg will be in the air for half a second. So when the third leg goes up, the front leg 1, is actually still in the air as well, which means you've only got 2 legs in contact with the ground, legs 2 and 4. So already that cannot be tripodal. The next thing is, if it's dual strike, it means there's always 2 legs that are in contact with the ground. So far that's good. As soon as the leg 2 raises, by that point leg 1 will have hit the ground again, because that's half a second after it did, right? So that means that then I'll have leg 3 and leg 2 raised, but legs 1 and 4 will be on the ground. And then you can see there's a sequence, given that a leg will be in the air for half a second, but the interval between the legs is a quarter of a second, you'll always have 2 legs up, 2 legs down throughout that, and that would be dual strike. So I'm just going to write dual against walk. If I look then at trot, the difference here is the intervals are actually half seconds. So it looks like the first and fourth leg leave the ground, half a second later the third and the second do, but by that time first and fourth will have come back down. So you've always got 2 legs on the ground, so that would be another dual strike pattern. With pacing, it's the same thing. It's the exact same intervals, just in a different sequence. So again, I don't really even have to test that. I've got the same thing as in trotting, so that would be dual as well. With jump, the back 2 legs go first. The front 2 legs go a quarter of a second later, which means the back legs haven't hit the ground yet. So all 4 are off the ground in that second quarter of a second. So that is neither. That one doesn't work. Bounding, same concept, but now with half second intervals. So this is the same as trot or pace. So that one will be a dual. And then finally is pronking, which is a weird word. And that just looks like hop, like just literally bouncing off the ground almost. So all 4 legs leaving the ground and then contacting the ground at the same time. So there's not 2 in contact. So that means overall there were 4 dual strikes And I didn't find any tripodal in the process. There was never really a point where only one leg was off the ground at one time. So that would mean 0 tripodal and 4 dual strikes. The answer is A. So that's just definitely a very tedious question. Question 2, consider the following statements. So we've got all of these. I skip these and I go straight to what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the false statements and I write F or T against them. So in my notes, I would just have 1, 2, and 3, and then I would just have F or T against each of them. So 3 legs may be raised at any one time in quadrupedal locomotion. So if I look through, I don't think there was any time where there was where there were 3 legs raised. I think it looked like it was only ever 2 at a time, if not all at a time. 3 was a weird one, so that would immediately be false. 2, jumping and bounding are most similar in phase shift pattern. So jump and bound, if I look at them, it does look like, so they've got 3 and 4 go first, so the back legs, and then the front legs. This one is front legs, then back legs. But in terms of similarity, there's probably the most similarity between these two than any other two, because if I look at, because in terms of, it says phase shift pattern, not necessarily the timing or anything. So this is just front, back, front, back, front, back. So yes, there'll be a change in whether it's a leading or a trailing pattern, but overall the actual gait system, the pattern is actually the same, just different in terms of its time intervals. But that's not really what we're looking at in this statement. So that is a very true statement. Obviously with trotting and pacing, they're pretty similar as well because they've got the same interval, but it's a different sequence of legs. Trotting is the diagonals, whereas pacing are each side. But again, the difference is that's a very different pattern. The timing is pretty much identical, but the pattern is actually different. So if you were to look at, for example, the footprints of a trotting and a pacing animal, it would look very different. If you looked at the footprints of a bounding and a jumping animal, it would look identical, right? It would just be that the difference would be which leg they started on. And then 3, trotting is a trailing pattern. So we looked at trotting and we look for UT because that there will tell us whether it's a leading or a trailing one. And we can actually see that it's got both a front and a back leg starting. So we can't really say that it's one or the other. So that's a false statement like that. And so therefore it's 1 and 3, but not 2. And so the answer then is B. And then the following information relates to questions 3 and 4. So a visual representation of gait pattern can be generated using dot diagrams, while it can also be described as a linear algebraic sequence. So for example, walking can be represented as a dot diagram where active complexes are shown as black dots. So we've got walking here, and we've got to now understand this new pattern. So if we try to get it all on screen, we can see, we'll look to walking, and the way that I would do this is I would create a quick pattern here so I don't have to keep bouncing between the two. I would just go, okay, it goes 1, 3, 2, 4. So 1, 3, 2, 4. I'm going to write that down, 1, 3, 2, 4, like that. So now I know it goes 1, and I go, yeah, it's the same concept, right? Instead of writing formulas, it's just writing a dot now. So 1, then 3 comes in. Remember, this is only a quarter of a second has passed, so the first one would still be active at that point. And then after that, the 3 is trailing, and then we have 2 comes in. And then finally 4 comes in with 2 trailing, like that. So there we go. So this makes sense. It's literally just a different representation of the same information. And it can also be represented in the linear algebraic form, and there we go, 1, 3, 2, 4, 1, 3, 2, 4, like that. So we have to be prepared for use of either of these new patterns. The dot diagram below represents which of the 6 primary gaits. So looking at this, you'll notice that one thing that I did as a trick is I changed the actual positions of the legs compared to the first table. The first table had 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got it upside down now. The left and right are still on the same sides though. So watch out for that. So with this one, so the leading legs in this case, or at least what looks like the leading legs, is legs 3 and 4. So we look to 3 and 4 and we go, that lines up with jumping. I'll just move this, there we go. So that lines up with jumping like that. And then a quarter of a second later, the front legs should come into play. So if we look at this, and then we can see quarter of a second later and it's actually not come in yet. It's still the rear legs. Then we have the front legs coming in like this. So what that means is that this may not have been the leading legs. We may be partway through the gate system. So maybe it was already on its second go, and so we're actually on the front legs here, like this, or we were actually on the rear legs of the bounding sequence, like this, and then it takes half a second before the front legs go again. So if we look at this here, then that means that this would be 1/4 of a second, so nothing changes. Then another 1/4 of a second, meaning a half second from here to here. Now it's switching, right, from rear to front legs like that. And so that would mean then that in this case, bounding would make the most sense because of the time interval. Then we have question 4. Okay, I'm going to try this one again because I actually made a mistake with it. It's a very complicated question. So an overlay of dot diagrams of 2 quadrupeds was constructed over the same time interval. Black dots are shown where one of the 2 animals' motor complexes for a given leg are active, while triangles are shown for where both animals' motor complexes are active for the same leg, and crosses are shown when neither are active. So there's a lot to take in there, but basically it's just setting up the rule where we've got, I'll do it in black actually. So we've got dots. It just means one active, one of the 2 animals, but we don't know which of the 2. Triangles is going to be both. And then crosses means none are active or being used in that leg. So which of the following pairs of gait patterns were displayed by the 2 animals? So effectively what we have to do here is we have to disconnect the data back into 2 separate gait patterns. So the way that I would do this is you can kind of decode it by drawing out the 2. So if we just create like a little table like this, I might actually make that a bit bigger. So let's say we go like this. Position, this is going to be animal number 1, and then this is going to be animal number 2, like this. So at position T, I can see both of them were using this top left leg, which is leg number 1. So I'm going to put a dot in both of them like this, and I'm doing them now back to separate. Then one of them has a dot in the bottom left. So it doesn't matter which of the 2. So I'm just going to make that the top one. There we go. And neither are using the right legs at all. Then we go to a 1/4, and then all of a sudden both of them are being used here. So I know that both of them are going to look like this. And I can start to decode what the gait patterns look like individually. Then another 1/4 of a second later, both of them are using the top corner here. But one of them is using the bottom right, the other one's using bottom left, like that. Now this is where I don't know which of the 2 it is at this point. So what I'm going to try and do is trace this to particular gait patterns. So this is using legs 1 and 3 for this one here, and this one is using just leg 1. So this is 1 and 3. So now if you go back, you can see I've actually changed the orientation as well, so watch out for that. I might get rid of some of this scribbling. So which one uses both legs 1 and 3? So both the left sides should be UT. So U1T, there it is there. So that looks to be a pacing animal. And that's the only one that uses just the left. You can see pronking as well, but that uses both the left and the right at the same time. And the one that uses only the leg 1 first, I can see is walking, like that. You can see that trotting, for example, that uses leg 1 and leg 4 simultaneously, which we did not have. So immediately now, I actually don't need to decode it any further. It's pacing and walking. Simple as that. So there we go. So this one must be pacing, and this one must be walking. And then from there, that's going to be my answer. Now you might be thinking, hang on a second, but this one is then using legs 1 and 3 at the same time, and that's not shown in the diagram or in the table before. But remember, this is 1/4 second intervals. The leg stays active for half a second. So there's going to be a trailing effect where leg 1 is still trailing while leg 3 of the walking pattern comes into play, and it keeps going through. But this is pretty much it. It's not really about knowledge of the locomotion of some random animal or biology or anything. It's just about trying to think logically about what's the best way to decode the information to make conclusions. This is pretty much what we're being tested on. Anyway, that is everything there for those questions. So hopefully that was really helpful to run through. Hopefully you did pretty well with those 9 questions. That's 9 more in the bank. I think now that should put us over 110, 115 questions or so. But yeah, I'm just going to keep making these. You can see as well, there's not as much focus on GAMSAT as there was prior to March. I'm now past the GAMSAT phase. Now my focus is very much on applications at the moment. I'm sure a lot of you are probably in the application mode as well. So I'm hoping to do a video I'm hoping to do some stuff on like portfolio writing. So I'm going to be writing portfolios for University of Wollongong and for Notre Dame as well. And then working through a few of those. I've also got some other projects that I'm working on at the moment I can't really talk about just yet, but for the channel. I don't know how long they're going to take to get sorted, but I'm going to try and get them done as quickly as possible because my calendar starts getting busier and busier as we head into May. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. And I'll see you guys in the next one.